It is April 19th. It is the second Sunday of Easter, and we are so glad that you have chosen to join us, to be with us this morning. We hope you are doing well, and we hope that you're coming down off of a wonderful Easter celebration. We had just a wonderful weekend last weekend. We had close to 100 cars in our drive-in service. It well exceeded anything that we were thinking was going to happen, and maybe shame on us for not expecting something that big. But it was just a wonderful weekend. If you weren't able to be with us and you weren't able to see it, that stuff is still on our website. If you want to go to our website, you can watch the service from last weekend, all of that. A couple of things in terms of announcements. There's really not a whole lot to announce. We are looking forward to the next time we're going to be able to meet live, and we really don't know as much as we know about as much as you do. We are looking at potentially the second Sunday in May, which would be Mother's Day, which would be a great day to gather again. But again, we're just we're waiting for word on a national level, on a state level, all of that, still taking precautions, so forth. And so in terms of that, that's really what's sort of dominating. All the events, all the things that are going on in the church, all that stuff is still on hold. So we're beginning a new series this week. We will probably take all 3 of those weeks will be online. So however you're watching us this morning, I would ask you to just keep making plans for that for the next 2 Sundays after today. A couple other things. If you're watching this probably doesn't apply to you, but if you want to listen to our service on the radio, we have that. We take the Sunday morning service and we rebroadcast it on Wednesday nights on 95.9 The Light, which is a radio station here in the Canton, Louisville Alliance area. And so if you want to listen to that, or especially if you know someone who is not online, if they're not watching on Facebook or anything like that, they just simply want to listen to the message, that's going to be available every Wednesday night, at least for the foreseeable future. So we continue to look forward to that. But it has been a strange week. Obviously, Easter was a good thing. We, of course, were all still watching the news, reacting to the coronavirus. We had snow this week, and on April 15th, the government gave us money, which is just a bizarre thing. That's just how crazy everything has turned in our lives. And so, but we're glad that you're with us. We hope that this service will be a time of encouragement for you. And let's continue our service with some music.
The sky shall unfold, preparing his entrance. The stars shall applaud him with thunders of praise. The sweet light of his eyes shall enhance those awaiting, and we shall behold him then face to face, and we shall behold him. We shall behold him face to face in all of his glory, and we shall behold him. Yes, we shall behold face to face in all of His glory. We shall behold Him. Yes, we shall behold Him. Face to face, our Savior and Lord, we shall behold Him, our Savior and Lord. Our Savior and Lord.
I want to continue our service with a time of prayer and just a word of encouragement as well. We have constantly every week we gather our prayer requests. We have people that we are tracking on a regular basis, people that we're praying for on a regular basis, and so we want to invite you to be a part of that. First and foremost, if you have anything specific that you want us to keep in mind, there's a couple of ways that you can do that. First and foremost, if you're watching us on Facebook, there's probably a message button right there on our website that you could send us a message. If you visit our website, there is a form that you can fill out there as well. It can simply just give us a quick synopsis of what's going on in your life. And there's even an option that is a private option or a shareable option, which means if you want to just direct that towards myself, not make that public, you can. If there's something that you want to share that you would invite other people in the congregation to pray about, we want that to be an option as well. But we don't want you to feel like you're alone. We don't want you to feel like you are abandoned or by yourself. I know everyone is sort of having that feeling, that tendency, and so we're desperately trying to make sure that no one feels that way. So if there's anything that you need from us, if there's any need that we can address, something that we can help you with during the week, something that we can simply pray for, please let us know. And so we thank you for that. But let us enter into a time of prayer, and we'll close with the Lord's Prayer. Let's pray. God, we do thank you. We thank you for this week. We thank you for the life that we have after Easter, the life that we have after the resurrection. God, we ask this morning that we would continue to walk and to live in the new part of the story that has come to us. We know that Friday is past and that Sunday is here. We know that the work that you intended on the cross was accomplished, and we receive the benefits of that as your people. So God, we thank you for all that you have given to us, and we thank you for the extreme amount of patience that we've been forced to live under. We pray that you'll continually watch over and guard those who are serving on the front lines, those who are doctors and nurses, those in the healthcare profession, for those that are thinking and dreaming and working on a cure or a treatment. We pray that you will give them Godspeed, and that you'll also give them wisdom and knowledge. For those that are struggling, for those that this has gone well beyond the thought that we had of being down for a few weeks, and this is affecting not only our economy, but their personal economy. We pray that you will provide, that you will multiply resources, and that all of this would be done under your hand. God, we thank you for the privilege of being your children, and it is in that we respond and say, Our Father, who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done, on earth as it is in heaven. Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our debts as we forgive our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from evil. For thine is the kingdom, and the power, and the glory forever. Amen. So it's the week after Easter, and my temptation was to just talk about that, just to go from the resurrection and talk about how all of those things have been changed, or everything sort of got put back together. The very happy ending that we get at the end of the Gospels, the things that give us great comfort, where we see Jesus ascending and the great commission that is given to the disciples and all of that. And that was my temptation, to sort of take last Sunday and just sort of ride that into the sunset. And as I got past Sunday, I realized a very powerful truth as we go into this new series. And it is the truth that for many of us, even though we know the reality of Sunday, even though we know the reality of the resurrection, there is still a lot of uncertainty. It would be my hope, my prayer, that somewhere around noon on Easter Sunday, that all of this would go away. That all of this, the flowers would all bloom, and everything would just, the music would start coming on. You see the words of the cascade for the end credits, and it's just the end of the story. And as we know, that's not the case. There's still a lot that we don't know. We don't know when we will be back together as a congregation. We don't know what that will look like when it does happen. My guess is if I was some prognosticator and I was able to concretely predict that we're going to be open on such and such date, that still would not mean that there would be everybody present. There would still be some parts of our congregation that are still at high risk, and it's probably not wise for them to come out. There are some people who are worried about their incomes, and they're watching all these sort of pins fall at the end of the lane, and as this pin falls and this pin falls and this pin falls, that everyone is being affected. That there is still uncertainty when you look at different areas of the government, that there's this side saying this and this side saying this, and as we watch them sort of go at each other, it's not bringing us any comfort. And so there is this sort of drive for good news, but there's also this reminder that bad stuff is still present. And it's this season of uncertainty that we live in. And as I was going back through the story, the scriptures, it was interesting because most of our story is set in a time of uncertainty. In fact, most of the situations that we find in both the Old and the New Testament, most of the times when we see God at his greatest work are during times of uncertainty. And so while, again, I wanted to just sort of stay on Easter and sort of just move from there, I recognize that most of us are still at Thursday. What I mean by that is we're still at that point in the Last Supper with Jesus gathered with his disciples. And perhaps that's the most uncertain part of the story. When the disciples had gathered or started that week, we started that journey a few weeks ago with Palm Sunday, and it all seemed like it was going to go extremely well. It was going to be perfect. The people were laying the palm branches down, and everybody's walking into the city. As that week progressed, the energy started changing a little bit. And all that popularity that was there on Palm Sunday, it started to dissipate. And by the time you get to Thursday, the day before Good Friday, the day before Jesus is crucified, that things really went in a different direction. They were all looking forward to Passover, which was the meal that they were going to celebrate together. And when they realized they go through that day on Thursday, and Jesus does not enter into the city on that Thursday. In fact, he waits. He waits till almost sundown, and then he sort of shares with his disciples what the plan is going to be. I want you to go into the city, and I want you to find this man. He's got a donkey, and and there's another scene where there's a man who we have a room prepared for us. There's a lot of weird secrecy. There's a lot of like, how did he know this, and when did he make these arrangements? And they thought this was going to be a night of celebration. In fact, that night that they were celebrating, if you look in the Old Testament, the whole idea of Passover comes from an incredibly hard context. The Israelite people were in slavery for 400 years, and it seemed like God was not there. It seemed like God was not present. It seemed like God had forgotten them, had abandoned them. And that very night, after Moses and Pharaoh had tussled through 9 of the 10 plagues, it finally became clear. Tomorrow morning, Pharaoh is going to let you go. And that very night that they were celebrating, Jesus is celebrating this with his disciples. It is the height of uncertainty. No one knew what was going to happen the next day. No one knew what the promised land looked like. No one knew what even the next hour would look like. It was a time of uncertainty for those in the Old Testament. And it was now this scene that was taking place in the New Testament that was also incredibly uncertain. When we get into John chapter 13, they're sitting in this scene, having the Last Supper. And verse 21 says, after saying these things, Jesus was troubled in his spirit and testified, truly, truly, I say to you, one of you will betray me. The disciples looked at each other, and this is the word that is incredibly important, uncertain of whom he spoke. The disciples had no idea what was going on. And you could sort of start to feel that sort of tension building as they realized this story's not going the way we expected it. We thought this was coming to an end. We thought this was coming to a place of resolution. We thought tomorrow was going to be the day that we were going to march into the city. We were all going to be announced as rulers. We would see the dawn of a new day, a dawn of a new era. And now the disciples sit in a place of uncertainty, much like you and much like me. And even though Jesus had predicted this over and over and over again, there was parts of it they just didn't want to hear. And I would say most of us are probably in that same place. We sort of watch the news, and there are people that you're going to hear what you want to hear. If you want to hear the ray of hope, then you are picking that out in the newscast. If you want to hear woe is me, you're going to pick that out in the news that you hear. It's called confirmation bias. It's really what we're looking for. But the main idea for us this morning is that most of what we find in the Scriptures, most of what we find when God is at work in our lives is found during moments of uncertainty. Because if you ask the disciples, if you were to sort of pull them to the side and say, when was God the most present? When was God the most at work? And you could certainly point to Friday, you could certainly point to Sunday. But I would say that moment when the disciples did not know what was happening, that was probably when he was the most near to them. If you look through the pages of the Scriptures, you have the story of Joseph. At the end of the book of Genesis, we have this amazing story of Joseph, who eventually becomes second in command over all of Egypt. But at the very beginning of his story, he is thrown into a pit, and he is listening to his brothers talk about his fate. Just imagine the uncertainty of being there and listening, and you can hear the conversations of your brothers, of your family. You talk about some of the family problems that you have. Think about some of the family problems you have. You have not had a conversation where the brothers are standing and you can hear them saying, well, we should kill him. Well, no, we shouldn't kill him. We should sell him. No, we should kill him. And eventually they do sell him into slavery. You think about the story of King David. If you want to read the story of great things that God has done, but also a story of tragedy, just take a walk through 1st and 2nd Samuel. That at the end of David's reign, he is awoken one morning with the news that his son has gathered an army and is going to try to overthrow him and take over the kingdom. Now, whatever issues you've had with your kids, well, I've got issues with my kids, and I've got issues with what they're doing. They've made bad choices. We haven't talked in a while. You don't have family issues like this, that your son has decided to put an army together to come and overthrow you. Even at the beginning of the Passover story, where Moses is battling with Pharaoh, the very beginning of that story, where Pharaoh is trying to completely wipe out, to completely produce an act of genocide. And this mother who sees her baby, this fine baby, and she realizes that she cannot go with what Pharaoh had ordered. Pharaoh had ordered that all baby boys be thrown into the Nile River. And by seeing Moses at the beginning of the book of Exodus, in Exodus chapters 1 and 2, we sort of see this story where the mother realized, I have to do something. And she makes this incredible choice where she puts him in this basket and she sets him in these reeds on the banks of the Nile. Think about the uncertainty of this. It's like, well, I don't know whether I would rather have the soldiers of Pharaoh come take my child or just simply give him up to a crocodile. God was at work in those times of uncertainty. And the Apostle Paul, who writes most of the New Testament, who had seen the risen Lord on his way to Damascus, he writes the words that encourage and teach and edify. And at the end of the book of Philippians, which we think is possibly one of his last books, he has this struggle that goes on inside of him. He knows, I would like to come see you, but I also know that I would like to see my Lord. It's better for you that if I stay, and it may be the case that I don't get to come and see you. Most of the New Testament was written in a time of uncertainty. But the story continues as you go through, again, that Passover story where Jesus is sitting with his disciples. He takes the bread and he takes the cup. And he continues to say and do things that we celebrate and we look at today as this sort of beautiful idea. But they had no idea what was going on. He says, I want you to take this bread. This is my body. Then he takes the cup. He gives thanks. He says, this is the blood of this new covenant, which is poured out for many. And each of the Gospels sort of tells us this story. And Peter, in the Gospel of Mark, sort of chirps up and says, even if I fall away, even if all fall away, I will not. Peter was thinking, I don't like this plan. I don't like this situation. I don't like the way these things are going. But the question for each of us this morning, the question that was for Peter, as we face our personal, as we face our local, as we face national uncertainty, the question that I want you to wrestle with this morning, is it possible that God is still active? Is it possible that God is still accomplishing his purposes when there is no indication of his activity? Is it possible that God is still active in the world? Is it possible that God is still active in your world when everything seems to be going backwards? I think if we were again to be able to interview the disciples and ask them about these darkest hours with the clarity of hindsight, when did God accomplish his greatest work? They would say it was during that evening. That was the beginning of possibly the 3 worst days of human history. The time between Jesus' crucifixion and the time between the resurrection. Think about all of your life, all of your plans, all of your dreams, everything that you have been working for, it had disappeared. And they had no idea what was going to happen. When life is uncertain, God is not. When life is uncertain, God is not. He still has the whole world in his hands. Good things come from broken things. When we can see that God is behind or in or working through the undesirable circumstances, even the ones we bring upon ourselves, there is still a sense of purpose and peace that emerges. Now, I get it. I understand there's some of you who hear this say, all right, thank you. That was great. It's very inspiring. That makes me feel better. That's not going to help me get a job. That's not going to help pay my bills. It's not going to restore my 401k. I get it. It won't. But it will allow you to maintain hope and faith in the meantime, which is the story of the Old and the New Testament. Having and maintaining hope and faith even in these dark times. I would love for every part of the scriptures to end with the happy story. I would love to be able to tell each of you you're going to have a happy story. Everyone's going to live to be 95. All of your kids are going to go to Ivy League schools. We're all going to be wealthy. Everyone's going to be healthy. No, that's not the story of the faith community. And that's not the story that we know to be ours. What my hope is that you will be able to go to bed at night with a confidence that God has not abandoned you. The idea, the understanding, the reality that God has not abandoned you. It is my hope that this will motivate you to be on the lookout for his grace and intervention. That you truly are looking for the positive instead of the negative. God is at work, whether you see it or whether you believe it or not. And it's my hope that it will keep you from leaning in directions that will only make it worse. There are choices that you normally wouldn't make, but in a dark season, you are faced with those choices. It's my hope that you will not make the choice simply because of the season that you're in. And the reality, my hope for all of you, is as we continue, as we sort of get into this exhausting phase of it, as we're sort of looking and leaning on the media to provide us with some insights about the future, I don't want you to sink into despair. I don't want you to sink into despair. Remember, when life is uncertain, God is not. When life is uncertain, God is not. He's still got the whole world in his hands. And as we were thinking about the title for this, there is that old song that is incredibly popular. You may have sang it at camp. You may have sang it in Vacation Bible School. If you're a child of the 70s, you should know the song. It is a great idea. And it would be my hope as we go through this series that this would get caught in your head. Now, I get songs caught in my head all the time, and it's sort of a weird thing. And once you get a song or a tune there, it gets stuck, and you can't get rid of it. But I would hope that this one would be the one that is stuck inside your head. And so I want to close with us singing this song. It is the song, He's Got the Whole World in His Hands. So I'm going to invite Joyce to come back up with me because I don't sound that good. And we're going to try our best to sing just 3 verses of this song as we close. So let's start. hope that you sing that all week long. We hope you have a great week. We will see you back here next Sunday for part 2 of He's Still Got the Whole World in His Hands. Go in peace to love and serve the Lord. Thanks be to God.